Alright. Hard to believe it's already been 11 days, but you know, here are the tracks. Alright. Yesterday was pretty good, I would say. We caressed our 170. We got to our 170 capstone. Perhaps in a day or two, we'll get to our 180. And then we also have to refocus on this stuff. We're probably gonna do more than one play of 160 until we can get our reset and our reading in line for triples. Let's start. No time like the present. I got the preset again. Once again, back in preset. A little slower than usual. Hey, Herbert. It is windy, yeah. Cold. Son, what is this complaining about cold? Thought you were okay with cold. That's nice that it entertained you. It was an entertaining run. Earlier today too. It's going pretty well, Albert. Pretty well. I realize I can't chew my gum while doing this. It's very distracting to have something in my mouth. Oh. I'll keep that in mind next time. You just reformatted? Sounds like cleaning day. I haven't done that in a while. I should really consider it soon. Have so many work files and workflow stuff that needs to be archived in an organized way. What's your favorite thing that you bought at the grocery store, son? Oh yeah. I'm curious how big the Pop-Tart aisle is nowadays. Oh. You were driving to the store when I asked you that? Oh. Oh, so you're heading there now. Are you at the store right now? Going deep into that Pop-Tart aisle. Offers was on the money right there. Gotta pick up a good sauce, son. You gotta pick up a good sauce. Listen, don't yikes me. There's gotta be a magic sauce out there. Takes a while to adjust. I gotta get used to it. Takes like a whole minute plus. Looking for maybe 15 seconds, probably 15 seconds tops. Anywhere in the 2 minutes, just looking for 15 seconds. Ooh. I would say at most like 10 seconds. In like between 40 minutes and 60 minutes. 40 seconds and 60 seconds into it. I think we're only gonna do this one until we're really comfortable. And then we'll step up and use this as the foundation. Keep dropping like every 4. It's not resetting properly. Ring figure is dropping too quickly on the 3rd node over and over again. I mean, I could try to alternate it. That's a lot better. I kind of clicked there for like a minute or two. That's a lot better. For like a stretch of an entire minute, I was kind of on point. Give this one or two more runs. Trying really hard to focus right now. It's kind of like getting there, kind of not. really hard to get it right off the bat. The longer it goes, the closer I get to it. It's practically ending before I get a chance. It's a dexterity problem. It's not a stamina problem. I have more than enough stamina. Just can't seem to get them to go back to back. Just like too early now? Oh. Yeah, I'm too early. I think that's good enough for today. For the stuff. We're gonna just stick to this until something clicks. Well, we'll see tomorrow. Alright. So let's go down. Can't even get like 10 seconds anywhere. Sure. That gives me the proper burn-ish. I can like step down probably. Hopefully. Too much dexterity check. Definitely not a stamina thing. I'll say stamina is at like 60 or 70% right now. Just can't move my fingers that fast. No proper form or anything. kind of did it for like a minute. The early minute was pretty good. Okay. It was good for like a minute. And then everything kind of just fell apart. The moment my fingers stuttered once, I couldn't find it again. Not enough time to recollect myself. One of the telltale signs that I don't have a dexterity problem is when I can relax and speed up and slow down throughout the map, so I can like hone in and stuff. That time it was just when a beat is skipped, it's just all sorts of, I don't know where it is. Gotta get to that point where I feel like I can speed up and slow down whenever I feel like, and then narrow it in. If I can feel that, then I know that I have enough dexterity for it. It doesn't have to be accurate. It's just I need the flexibility to be able to go faster and slower. And that time I couldn't go any faster. That is good. I can go faster whenever I feel like. Yeah, it's always great to know that you have, dexterity to go faster. At least personally. In my mind, if I can always go faster, then I can always slow down. Near the end, there was some stamina issue. I was tensing out near the last 40 seconds. But this is our stamina capstone because it's one of the longest. And then we have 155 as the other one. Yeah, no stamina issue. It's it still takes a really long time to settle in. And it still takes 15 seconds or so. So it's very difficult to just be right on the dot right in the beginning. So like if I were to play these songs, I would have to play at least twice to settle into the BPM. Or just play back-to-back songs that have the same BPM to settle in. I can even feel a 1 BPM difference. It still takes a while. It's a little bit less subtle though. Faster to adjust to a similar BPM. But since we're stepping up and down, it takes at least 30 seconds. It's not bad. It's quite a bit better than before, for sure. Still like jumping around a little bit and having a bit of a twitch here and there. And then now we don't need to rest anymore because we're barely even close to taxing our dexterity or our stamina now. Anything below 160 is comfortable again. Still takes a little bit to adjust though. But we always have the luxury of speeding up and slowing down at 160 or lower. Come on, Oxy Laser. No problems. Got a little bit lazy waiting for the client to, it took me a while. I was going a little bit slower than I wanted. Yeah, so now we try to ramp up to 167 as soon as possible. This is no longer a dexterity check at 160. And then staminas. We're way over stamina. Operating at like 70% at the max. This is like 30%. Yep. It's definitely worth noting that I'm gonna have to write a note to myself. I can definitely explain something about there's this like, I feel like there's this misconception about the source of people's finger lock. Like the whole concept of finger lock, I think it's a little bit misconceived. I just had a thought about it. I'll think about it later. However, I think this is where we stop on the slowdown, because I don't think 150 and 140 is going to be enough anymore. So what, we go straight up to 180, drop down to 155 after stopping by the triples? Probably a good thing. Perhaps dropping to 160 is alright, then we can finish off with one of these. Oh, think about it. We're almost there though. There is one set that I have not touched at all, which is above 180. I say I wouldn't ever strive to be faster than, like, I wouldn't strive more than 200, really. I don't think there's any, I don't think, in my opinion, songs need to be greater than 200. Maybe momentarily greater than 200, but generally speaking, I don't think I require any of that to appreciate music. So once we complete, like, here, I think I'm pretty satisfied. You can always do short period bursts well above your range. So right now, like 180, it's still a little bit tough for the ring finger. Maybe 5 seconds, and I mean 5 seconds is really kinda all you need for a lot of things. However, if you get it up to like 30 to a minute, or like get up to 30 to a minute, 180, that would just mean it translates to a 5 to 10 second burst of 200 plus. Which is kind of enough for me, really. We're getting there. Today's day 11, man. It feels like a really long time, you know, 11 days, but at the same time, it feels so short as well. We're not even halfway there, and I think I'm gonna run the entire length of these two practice maps at the rate we're going. This is probably going to be the longest, although technically if we get to here, that's really the goal. There's really, everything else is pretty extra if we manage to do it. I might add 3 more map sets from 180 to maybe 190. We'll probably add, I'll see if I can find a, like, up to 190, maybe a 185 and a 190 step. This is way more comfortable, and in retrospect, it has generally been the case. Where way back, maybe 3 years ago, when I was messing around with playing on the ring finger or playing on the middle finger, and it's always been the case, and it still is 3 years later under practice. It's easier to consistently maintain a rhythm, like a speed, with my ring finger and my pointer finger, but it has always, still to this day so far, been less consistent. Starting and stopping, starting, stopping, starting, stopping, like triples, like bursts. largely the reason why I chose to do pointer finger and middle finger was because when you're playing songs, it's usually starting, stopping, starting, stopping, and bursts are far more common common elements naturally because it's shorter, right? So you can intersperse it a lot more in a song than long streams. So here I'm seeing the opposite effect. I am definitely way more proficient at doing triples with my middle finger. And that has to do with tapping in general. What I mean is, you know, you think about what you do in life, like generally habit forming, and when I'm like tapping to a song, when I'm listening to a song anywhere, I'd be tapping with my middle finger and my pointer finger. And it's irregular because when you're listening to songs, the rhythm changes a lot, right? It changes up and down. But usually you use your pointer and your middle finger to tap on like a table or something. However, here, when you're doing long, consistent, similar patterns over and over again, you start thinking about WASD. If you play a keyboard and mouse like I do a lot, ADing is the most frequent. And you often AD in a really characteristic pattern a lot of times. Because when you get bored, like when you're standing around getting bored waiting on a cue, you're gonna use your ring finger and your pointing finger back and forth. If you're a keyboard player, of course, like myself, I guess. And then you're just gonna go back and forth. The problem arises is that it doesn't necessarily, it's actually more of the exception than the rule to be consistent. ADing when you're playing in games are irregular. So what's happening here that I'm having problems with is when I hit like 168, where maybe right now it's at 167, where there isn't a stamina issue at all, my hands stutter, right? It stutters. Maybe that's a bit of biology, but at the same time, it might be habit too. Because when you strafe left and right, you don't strafe left and right in a consistent BPM. Like you don't go left, right, left, right, left, right. You go like left, left, right, right, or right, left, right, longer, right, left, right. So that kind of thing. And it's kind of really, it's not frustrating to me, because I know it happens. So when you get down to like 155 and 160, if the map goes long enough, I'm going to like tap early every once in a while, or I'm going to drop a note every once in a while. And that's just gonna be it, you know? I don't find it frustrating if I know why it's happening or what's causing it. So to me, it's unfortunate that, you know, it'll stop me from getting good at like higher act than I would like, per se, the game would like you to have. And it's unfortunate it'll stop me from like participating in, I don't know, the PP system or the ranking system. But that's just the way it goes. And I can explain why I, quote unquote, skip beats and miss time, which a lot of times this goes into a hot take on how I feel a lot of people use terminology that they can't explain about themselves. So one term that I hear quite often is finger lock. And finger lock is a huge umbrella. And finger lock is a symptom of a lot of things. But generally speaking, if you can't describe why you're finger locking and you're offering advice about finger lock, then that finger lock advice is probably not going to be very appropriate for the person you're talking to. It's not to say it's bad or good, because when you offer advice, it's kind of a passion thing, right? You're just trying to help and all that. So that's great. Just that here's a spin on finger lock right now. Just a quick hot take. So you have two components, dexterity and stamina. A finger lock is generally a momentary, sporadic thing, so something that occurs occasionally. Generally speaking, that can result from possibly dexterity, but that really isn't a component. The component is consistency, because finger lock is inconsistent. When you have a dexterity issue, that's when you start like consistently double tapping or consistently. That's not finger locked. That's a dexterity challenge, as in your fingers cannot go back and forth or have the dexterity or mobility to maintain the cadence. Sometimes when you offer advice about finger lock, it often comes off as an advice on consistency. However, there are many sources of finger lock that isn't attached to consistency. Regardless of how much stamina you have, it can be triggered spontaneously. Consider it a personality quirk or something that you do habitually. If you can explain it, I think it's a more reliable way of understanding. Maybe you can train it in some way, or come to like me where I kind of accept it, because I don't think there's any amount of training I can possibly do where dexterity and stamina doesn't come into play, where my fingers are going to quote-unquote lock up, as in it does something different than you expect. A characteristic way of determining if you're having a similar issue like myself, I call it an issue because it's undesirable for the game system, is that when you do it, you have no intellectual or mind-body feedback on it happening. So the irony here is, if you think you understand how finger lock works, then I don't think you're talking about finger lock. You're talking about a dexterity problem, as in something you can train and practice. When I think about finger lock, I think about something that happens subconsciously, or something that happens where your body does something and it stops doing it, and then it resumes doing it as though it didn't, and nothing has changed, right? That's what I truly think what finger lock is, but I don't really call it finger lock. I just call it, finger lock kind of describes it, so that's kind of what I'm referring to most of the time. Yeah, like a nervous tick. Hey, Worm. Yeah, like a nervous tick. And a nervous tick is a personality quirk. I call it a personality quirk because it's kind of it's a more optimistic way of describing it. Like, if you have a nervous tick, if someone recognizes that it's a nervous tick, and you recognize that it happens, you can play to that nervous tick. Like, I don't know, say I have this habit, and I'm sure if I point this out, people will be able to find it. When I'm thinking really hard, I have a habit of grabbing my hair, like just brushing my hair back or something like that, or like pull at my facial hair. I recognize it's a nervous tick, so at some times you can choose to try to like condition it out, or you can work understanding it's there. So for me, I think the whole aspect of finger lock can be a source of really terrible emotional damage that's self-inflicted in OS. Like, for OS players, it's, to me, the hot take, or like the deep cut here is, I like to believe that it is necessary for you to define and figure out what nature of finger lock are you experiencing. Because if you spend all that time hyper-focusing on the idea that you can do something or certain things about it, and it doesn't help you learn or feel acceptant about it. Like, for example, someone would go and get really angry that, I don't know, so-and-so, no matter how hard they train, there's this thing that just occurs, right? So you train harder and harder for it. There is a chance it'll go down, like it'll go away or kind of like suppressed to some extent. And then there are times when you're gonna have certain nervous tics that might just be there, and perhaps your approach is different, right? And that's worth investing in my opinion. For me, there's no amount of advice that someone involved in training that will remove what I'm describing. My hands periodically do that. It does that in every video game. Like, if you're thinking that OS, just training OS, moving my fingers back and forth is gonna stop that nervous tic or that finger lock, I use my fingers every single day. Like, nearly 90% of the time I'm typing. Like, my hands just don't sit there and rest there. And I still notice those things. Like, it still happens. So for me, I can express and understand that, nah, don't worry about it, you know? I'm not here to train that out. I'm here to train other things. It's going to happen while I'm training those things. It's not going to hurt my health. The reason why that's important is because if you don't try to understand why certain things happen, or maybe like try to discover other things to explain it, you could end up hurting yourself even more in the long run. And what I mean by that is not just physically. We've seen physically. Physically is very apparent, you know, RSI and all that stuff. But it can hurt you mentally and emotionally. It can destroy the thing you love. So sometimes, yes, it's awesome to feel like you're overcoming an uphill battle. And then other times, just understanding the stuff can elevate you too. So what I mean is, as opposed to me focusing on the aspect of finger locking, as in, I don't know why, no matter how many times I play 150 BPM with no dexterity or stamina challenge, my hand will accelerate at some point, and it happens. I can choose to spend all of my efforts around that one element, and that leads to hyper-focusing, right? Or I can focus on other things that I can improve around the thing. And maybe it'll go away, maybe it won't. Sometimes you have to decide, and awareness is necessary to redistribute your efforts. Hyper-focusing can be incredibly advantageous and incredibly disadvantageous. And that's kind of the whole balance between specializing and generalizing. So what is more important than the nervous tic or the finger lock that you've been working on for 6 months straight, right? Say you've been working on it 6 months straight. What could you have done or used that 6 months if you weren't hyper-focusing on that? That involves OS. Everything else. You can do everything else. So here, just to give an idea of why my training or my retraining is structured this way is, I personally have determined that a combination of this and these are enough for me to train without losing focus. So it provides things like 3 or 4 things that I'm willing to work on while remaining focused. If you add more to it, that just means you want to train more things, but it becomes less focus, right? So you're trying to find a balance. And when you're thinking about training or working on a skill, that's kind of what you want to commit to. So if you're thinking about, say, you're going to learn a new language tomorrow, starting tomorrow, the idea is how well mentally prepared are you? So how many things are you going to work on, aspects you're going to work on at once? And then what are the pros and cons? Is it focused enough or generalized enough? And for me, finger lock is a general problem. Or it's a specific problem where I've considered it. And since it's such a specific problem, it occupies such a small percentage of the things I can be working on. So when I think about, like, some people could say you're not accurate when you're doing this. It's like, well, there are 3 and 4 other things I'm doing while trying to produce a better accuracy. So that's the idea. There are well more than anything. We had a little conversation with some new people that I've met recently who are very candid and talk about their own approaches. Like, for example, if you haven't played OS for a while, the advice is to play some low diff long maps to get reacclimated. It's like, yes, that's true. But how many things are you willing to juggle? For me, I'm not willing to juggle aim for now, or reading skills, right? So I deliberately chose to focus on a lot of things that deal with retraining tapping. And tapping itself is involved in reading and aiming. But how much of it am I taking on at once? So it might seem like I'm only working on like 1 or 2 things, but I'm working on a lot of things. I only choose to work on as many things as I think I can proficiently work on without losing focus. So that's the idea. So if you're ever really learning something and really trying to get to the bottom of how to explain things that are the nitty-gritty of specific things that are making you screw up or something that are recurring, you have to increase the focus. So narrow down the focus and do specific tasks, right? If you're not concerned, once you're not concerned with those specific things, you expand. You start picking up more skills around it. So that's kind of the idea of most life skills and most skill building stuff. If you really love something and that something has become a specific problem, right? For example, you really love this vanilla flavored Pop-Tart. Like, you really love it. However, over time, you're gonna develop specific quirks with it, the specific nuances. One thing is you wish there were more things like it. That's an indicator that you're focused. You've pretty much explored everything about the vanilla thing, right? And then you're gonna start thinking about the specific things, like, man, if only this was so and so. That's a very specific problem. So it will become less, it's like, it's an insignificant, it may seem like a significant problem if you don't expand, but it becomes a very specific problem. So once you expand from vanilla Pop-Tarts, I don't know why I'm using vanilla Pop-Tarts, just because Sun was here. We were talking about Pop-Tarts earlier, and Sun's on a grocery store trip. So the idea is, the next thing you do is, how do you develop the skill or the life skill for appreciation for vanilla Pop-Tarts? You look at vanilla, other like related products of vanilla Pop-Tarts. So what happens then is you expand your knowledge of Pop-Tarts. And once you expand slightly, however you're comfortable with, right? You stretch out and slightly reach out your comfort zone. You grab hold on to a new thing. Then the specific thing that was bothering you about your love and joy takes a back seat. It may or may not disappear or completely change, but what you did was you refocus or you defocus on the specific problem, which has become insignificant to negligible in a way, and you acquired new things to appreciate and analyze. And eventually that new thing becomes one in the same, and then you'll find nuances of that property. Then you add another thing and another thing, and eventually you'll develop into a gigantic skill set, right? That feels all routine. That's kind of how I feel about the way most players haphazardly construct or try to deconstruct their playing habits, where they offer advice on a mechanic, however they don't necessarily know how to express exactly what that mechanic does for them, and also fail to express how, or unpracticed in explaining how that would work for the other person. So for example, it's a very common form of dialogue when it comes to this, and it's related to this whole practice thing. I can explain to you what I hope to do, what inspired me to do and choose these specific things, and then I will try to explain to you what it may do for you if you were to repeat this stuff, right? The standard form of dialogue is you do this and no explanation. It's just a leap of logic. So for example, oh, you want to de-rust quickly. Well, do these things. No explanation. As in, it's already inferred or implied that the advice you give is self-explanatory. It's not. It's usually not. If it was self-explanatory, you wouldn't have to suggest it. That's kind of the idea. So when you start discussing the things, it all makes sense. Trust me, like, there's no misunderstanding. It's just oftentimes when you discuss the details. Generally though, when you practice things and you teach things, when you practice and teach things, it's very difficult to practice the effort part, which is explaining what it'll do for you. So for me, when I offer something, I have to demonstrate it and explain it at all the things to myself first. If I can explain it to myself, then the next step is to explain it to another person. So yesterday, or actually, yes, I think it was yesterday. No, the day before, we had a really wonderful discussion about 3 different approaches to getting reacclimated to oaths, right? Some people just go in and play as hard as they can. Actually, let's use a softer sounding background. We had 3 different approaches. They will all lead to reacclimation to oaths, right? One was just push yourself as hard as possible, and do hard maps, go for it. The other one is lean in, long training, low diffs, so that your dexterity doesn't get checked at the door, and you build up consistency and reinforce your foundations. That's excellent too, the whole deal. And for me, I compartmentalize that, so I take it even slower. I do the re-tapping training first. So I training my ring finger and my pointer finger, right? It's going really well, by the way. Like, it's going way faster than the middle finger because I have legacy. I'm translating what I do with my pointer middle finger to my pointer ring finger. And then I'll go into reading, probably. And then I'll go into aiming last. And aim is last because I already use this form of aiming, and it's very specific. Like, drawing and stuff is very specific to this hand motion, and I don't practice any other habits with my right hand that's similar, because I can explain to myself that the more complex the movement is and the more specific it is, right, it's easier to remember. Like, for me, it's easier to remember.
I swear I just did this, but here you go, loot ice cream.
Yes, simply scrub harder to de-rust quicker. Son, do you know how rust works? No, I'm just kidding. You really do scrub rust off. I guess that metaphor works. Done, that pun. Anyways, the idea is, there are many ways to approach things, and my way is a way that I can define myself, and that's just how it works. I think it's fun to compare and contrast other people's approaches, and it tells me a lot about them. I don't know if when I explain things myself that people get an impression of what my quirks are, but I take things quite slow. Like, I'm an endurance person, right? So we're not bolting into, if I take a 8-month break, I'm not gonna come back bolting into everything. I'm gonna prioritize stuff. So one thing that I prioritize is the weakest elements of the skill. So a lot of times people describe the skills, they use skill as a sum of their parts. So basically, OS is a skill. Playing OS is a skill. I don't see playing OS as a skill. I see OS as a combination of a lot of different types of skills. And a lot of those skills, I know what you're saying. It's like, oh, I do too. Like, there's tapping, there's aim, I understand. Intellectually, I think most OS players understand that there are many skill components to the game. The advice and how they treat the training for it doesn't suggest to me a lot of times that they understand what they intellectually appreciate. Like, for example, if those things are different skills, then one should be able to see that I am only training a very specific component. And I'm communicating that very obviously. So when someone knows and appreciates intellectually that OS is composed of many different skills, and then suddenly offer an advice to a person that clearly is only training a component of that skill, then it would imply that there's a dissonance. They know that OS has many skills, but they train like it's one skill, for example. So that's kind of a telltale sign that, to me, when someone treats it that way, they're intuitive. They're an intuitive person, so they practice intuitively. What's a great example of intuitive learning? Someone who doesn't like going to school and learning compartmentalized fundamentals. They enjoy watching someone do all of the things and then trying it themselves. That's an intuitive person. So you see someone like land an FC on, I don't know, let's do a shout out to a classic map, I don't know, an FC on the Big Black or something. And then this person says, you know what, I can do that. And they go on the journey to doing that, just full stop, jump into Big Black, right? That's an intuitive person. someone who's going to rely on their intuition to get better. For the most part, I think there are things that I can do that works that way. For this particular game, it's not that. It is not that in the end. That's what you tried in the beginning of O's. Didn't go well, yeah. So at some point, it's a one-way trip. I don't think the average person, when you take statistically the average person when they're training skills, intuition comes first. It's the most natural thing we rely on, because when we grew up, right, when we're young and inexperienced, we have our intuition. Our intuition is fundamentally our safest place. However, as we're growing up, institutions, as in school and stuff, try to impart you on the systematic way of improving and analyzing things. So while we're inexperienced, at a period of inexperience, that component is being introduced. But before ever that, what's the most natural thing to do is to rely on our intuition. And that will be a practice for the rest of your life. Like, so it goes without saying that it isn't fair, and it's not the same, that if you become analytical about something, it is an acquired skill trait that is way harder. It's not like, we're not talking about subjective. This is no subjectivity at all, because inherently you'll always do something intuitively as a human being far more frequently than removing that human element from you. I mean, you could try very, very hard to be a robot and say that you view everything objectively and pragmatically. However, that's not the case. That's like forsaking, your human nature. So when it comes to practice and skill work and a lot of those things, that's where a bridge becomes a problem. So for example, when you're offering advice and you're relying on intuition, right? If you're intuitive and you offer intuitive advice, generally speaking, it's consistent for you and it's rarely consistent for the people you talk to. The way we bridge different people, like I can't read your mind, you can't read my mind. So if I'm intuitive, there's once in a lifetime where you and I will be on the same page intuitively, right? Because we both have different life experiences and our intuitions won't really line up. However, you kind of wiggle. So like we're on the same page like 60%. Like that's good enough most of the time. To bridge the rest is to go into the field of objectivity and pragmatism. The irony here is a lot of times pragmatism is very, very difficult and is on a level that requires you to really, really suppress your intuition. That's how you bridge between two people, like objectively speaking. So for example, objectivity is the thing that two human beings can agree upon unconditionally. So when you start offering something objective and another person argues to that, you have not formed an objective advice. You have formed a subjective advice, an interpretive advice. For example, two human beings, they're human beings, so they're subjective and intuitive. So for example, this song, you need to tap 168 BPMs to FC this song. That's an objective observation. To bridge wholeheartedly 100%, two human beings will understand that this is 160 BPM. That's it. Like there's no concern, right? However, when it becomes more complex, like training stuff, you're gonna have to be able to explain the objective nature of the training in order to fully
grass, like bridge between two people. Now there is some leeway. If you get to know the other person, you can use your intuition, parts of your intuition that lines up with the other person. It's true. It's true. Technically you don't. Technically you don't. And that's where the pragmatism comes in, right? When you said technically you don't have to tap 168 to FC it, everyone's going to agree with you too. Because you can describe why technically you don't. Because you can have poor timing. You know what I mean? Like you can have fast or slow timing on that. And those are objective things. How do they impact practicing? Well, I can tell you that if someone was off time, you have to know that person in order to understand what they're trying to achieve. Like for example, how do you know if this is an improvement over what I did today? Which is not even on this list, is it? Oh, so I felt better today on this second score than the first score. The question is, you see all these objective marks, right? What does that tell you? Now you need to interpret it. And when you interpret it, you start using your intuition. You start using your human component, right? You look for patterns where there might not be patterns, or you look for patterns where there are obvious patterns. It's steers away from objectivity. So the idea when you talk about training and skill building and stuff, you're talking about a human being training a skill. So it requires that you be able to explain things as objective as you can, as in comprehensive. Yes, I could have felt physically better. I could have felt mentally better. It doesn't even have to be physical, right? So the idea is, it's very difficult, regardless of how much we want to say we're human beings, right? And know that we can train things or objectively evaluate or propagate things. I say for the most part, generally speaking, at least in the greater OS community, it's very reliant on intuition. And it leads to really fun discussions because it shows the difference between people and how they approach things. Like, I love when someone says something personal and it reveals so much about them. Like, for example, that whole idea of, oh, I just, go in and go ham and just play the hardest map I can and I improve over time. That says something. It says a lot about the person. Whether it's advice I'm gonna take, that's not really all that important, honestly. I'm gonna be real. Like, if you want to connect with this person, you participate in their realm. So when someone offers me advice, what I do is I try to explain what they're trying to tell me, right? Not explain what I do in response. Like, I don't say like, oh yeah, well, I'm doing something different. No, I probably can explain what they're trying to get at. And the first thing I start with 2 days ago was someone suggested I play low star, low diff, long maps. And immediately I explained what their intent was. It's like, yes, I agree with you. The person suggested that it would improve my finger control or get back my finger control. And I agree, it does. And so does the other stuff. So does the thing I'm doing. And so I explain like, yes, so what the approach you have is finger control, among other things. It also works back your aim consistency. It also includes your reading comprehension. and it also probably improve your stamina if you play long enough, right? That's the kind of thing, and it covers fundamentals. So the thing is, this person, I was trying to illustrate that this person did offer advice that helps with finger control. That is accurate. I took their advice and told them that, or I tried to share that it did way more than that. In fact, sometimes when you do way more, it also defocuses you. So there's advantages and disadvantages to including a lot of things and being focused. So not only did I not offer mine until after, I wanted to highlight that what they're doing is even more than they're suggesting. So when someone offers advice, I want to really explore what that advice is. So for me, then I can use that to communicate that I'm only at the moment interested in finger control. And I agree your advice offers finger control, but it also adds aim, reading, aim, reading, timing. There's a lot more things that are added on top of it, and I am not focused on that. This is why I chose my approach, which minimizes all the other things that you are also getting, which is good or bad. It's interpretive. Do I want to focus on all those stuff at once? Not particularly. Maybe it'll come later, that kind of thing. So a lot of times you don't even have to offer advice of your own, but use other people's ideas to see what you can add to them. And oftentimes, more is not always better for one's own personal goals. So one habit younger, more ambitious people do is take on more than they think they're taking on. So that's why school can kind of be boring at first. And what I mean by that is, one of the deep cuts here is that school doesn't necessarily offer you topics in which you are born to intuit immediately. And because of that, it creates a gigantic barrier. However, I can tell you for sure that when those kids who hated school grow older, I can probably use school as a great example of what they end up doing naturally later in life with something that they have developed intuitive investment in. So then the reflection is, why couldn't school have been like that? And the idea is, well, when you were young, you had no things that you're really attached to yet. And school is trying to expose you to that. And sometimes it doesn't offer it, Like, school is trying to do a lot. And that's why it feels unfocused. It feels less tailored. Because when you're young, you don't have any specific thing that you're going to invest in the stuff that school is trying to teach you. Or school is trying to get you to aware yourself. I think that's probably the biggest thing. School provides you with the stimuli to develop your own skills of problem solving. And that's kind of a misconception here. Like, school doesn't provide you one-for-one how to study sustainably, how to solve problems. They present you with the problems. They present you with the tasks. And hopefully that one day you develop the balance between focus and skill building, right? Like the balance of focus and generalization in skill building to apply it to whatever you end up enjoying. Well, I apply it to everything in general. And I really like school because that's the only way I escaped from. I know how this sounds, but I did like video games too. School was also an escape. Like, not school itself with the people in it, the idea of schoolwork is unadulterated. It's objective, right? If you're thinking about video games, what makes video games an effective escape from the more dynamic issues of life? Well, life is noisy. It's a lot of things all the time. If you want to sleep better, try explaining to yourself, how do you sleep better? There's so many things we don't understand. There's so many things, information and stuff you have to take in or observe, and you try your best. When you become objective and pragmatic, you start simplifying the things, because you simplify to the point where you can understand it or try to understand it. And school is kind of like that, for me anyways. Like, when you do your homework, it's simple. Like, what I mean, it's simple. What's simple may not necessarily be easy or hard, and what's easy or hard may not necessarily be simple. So they don't go back and forth. But in this case, it's simple in the way that it is defined. If you do your homework, you have the correct answers, you get a grade. So if you FC something, you've hit all the notes regardless of timing. Right? That's unquestionable. It's defined. So what is more objective? Going to a job, working for an undisclosed hour, and someone might recognize you've done a good job, or have all the right answers to a test and you'll always get a perfect score if you know all the correct answers. That's what video game is. So video game is an extension of school. When things are simpler and supposedly easier if the person practiced those skills since then. So school and all that stuff, to me, is the lowest effort possible. That's only suggesting from my perspective. It is one of the hardest things to do for most people, in my opinion, because unlike most people, I grew up non-intuitive, as in there were very few things that were very intuitive to me. What I mean is, I totally based my ability to do things through observation. And if you're ever wondering, like, man, why do, like, you know, you watch a comedy series where you feature a really high functioning person and the first thing they do is like, I don't get it. Why is this funny? Like, how do you intuit laughter? That kind of thing. That's kind of me when I was younger. Like, I don't understand why people, for example, have to feel better about themselves by losing control of their faculties, i.e. drinking, right? Or partying, when you could just be happy. Like, what I mean is, you do things that make you successful on paper, then you don't need to do the other things. So that's not me anymore, obviously, because I'm not a robot. I'm also a human being. So video games is another thing. It's actually a simplified form with a little bit of mess. Just a little bit. So here's what I mean. If school is almost fundamentally less messy, as in it's simpler, video games is slightly more messy. And what does that slightly more messy thing mean? Well, it allows you to flex your intuition. It allows you to form your own opinions. Allows you to be a little bit more creative, right? The irony here is, when you end up falling in love with a video game, you become less and less creative. Like a static video game, a static product, and you get closer and closer to what school is trying to do, which is to provide you with a foundation of objectivity, right? The foundation of crude but exact pragmatic problem solving, or task-oriented things. So the GOAT here, I think, even though I digress really far from the idea, is the stuff you do to learn how to train and understand why you can't get better and understand what your finger lock is. It's what you do in school. And I'm not saying school does that now, like in the way that video games do. It's just school can do it in that way, and I typically use that to my advantage, right? Well, before video games, school was that's where you get your enrichment. So it's pretty surprising how well a lot of people acclimate to understanding a lot of the things that school teaches, because and science teaches. What it is objectivity and pragmatism. The downside is, while the average went up, right? Like say an OS player who is really invested, they're kind of like above average when it comes to analyzing and solving their problems when it comes to OS, especially skill building and stuff. But that's where it ends, in my opinion. It's like above average. It's not at the skill cap. If it's a skill cap, you'd be pursuing a career in like science or something. So that's where I come in, right? That's where I feel that I can no longer resonate. I can recognize that if you're trying to solve a problem and you try really, really hard at solving it, eventually you'll develop problem solving skills. However, it's restricted to this. So I can take that advantage and use it as a way to get someone to solve life skills with the skills they develop in OS. One of the greatest things about education or school is that it is in the adult's power to offer a challenge that the kid cares about, so that they naturally develop pragmatic skills to solve. And here's a little bit of a deep cut, for better or for worse. How well you can communicate to me that you solve something in a game to another person is reflective of your objectivity and your educational background. So when someone goes around and just says, play more, and it's like the top 10 player in OS, they are very, very incredibly skilled and intuitive player, but they have no development in teaching, learning, or any form of objective skill, right? It's a trade-off they have. So one could consider that talent per se. Talent is where intuition takes prominent face, where it's actually, I feel it's a little overstated. Talent is an idea that where someone can naturally be great at something without consciously being aware and being able to explain and teach it. You can be very skilled at something and still be able to teach and instruct and be self-aware of it. So talent isn't just exclusive to someone who naturally have no idea what they're doing, but they're really great at it. It's kind of weird to say that way. I don't know if anyone has ever realized the separation between someone who's skilled and someone who's talent is the talent person relies solely on not using their noggin in an abstract way. So if you have something that you're really good at and you don't think about it, intellectually or pragmatically, and you can't explain it to someone, then you're probably talented. That's how I define talent. Yeah, so here's the thing, son. That's how you view talent. People who are intuitively get better at something quickly without needing to understand it that well. You are one of them. It's just varying degrees. Talent has varying degrees. You intuit a lot of things that you can't explain to me, Like, I can't be you through the instructions you give me. So there is some form of talent that makes you excel without needing the components to be able to explain it to yourself and others. You have started investing in using and applying understanding of the skill over time, but inherently you had talent to begin with, right? Talent is just that phase where it can, or the early phases where the person doesn't necessarily need any form of pragmatic use of, you know, skill building or anything. It just happens. And that's kind of cool. It also has some element of luck, right? And I mean, I'm gonna be real. That's fair. I can see I'm talented in some things. I think I just started analyzing more than the talents. Yes. So, one thing, and what you're saying is the GOAT here is that you can be talented and analytical at the same time. You don't have to stop. You don't have to stop with just relying on your talent. The thing here is the people you see that are truly talented, it's so overwhelming that they don't spend time doing any of the stuff that is needed, right? For example, the top of the world thing, right? The top of the world thing. You stop learning new things. You stop having incentive to using any other methods if you're already at the top. So when we talk about the examples we see on the internet about talent, right? A lot of it deals with individuals that are at the top. When they are at the top, it takes a very special someone and motivation or some sort of perception of goals in order to keep that person pushing for different analytical tools or overcoming things. So talent is what is that phrase? It can become a burden. So the unbearable weight of massive talent, right? I'm actually throwing a nod to Nicolas Cage's movie, the movie that stars Nicolas Cage, but what the idea is, it might seem easy until it's not, and when it's not, you start developing skills. You start learning new things revolving around that skill. So it's when people see talent, or like a human adult see talent, right? The first thing they want to do is like, what else can you do with that talent? Unfortunately, when you're talking to a talented person, sometimes that's all they care about. So if that's all they care about, then it will always be more difficult to get them to care about something else. And to me, OS has that weirdness. So here's the silver lining. When someone gives me advice about how to improve OS, and it's incredibly intuitive, it also means they're probably talented too. As in, they are more talented, whatever it is, they are more talented at the outcome than I am. However, it also makes them an incredibly unself-aware instructor and teacher, because they don't have to evaluate the things they do when anything they do helps them improve. And it comes full circle. You see what I mean? Like when a talented person goes around and say, this is what I did to work, it is even more unlikely that this is how it works. Because if the outcome they're measuring is improving and they're talented, well, everything leads to improvement. It's a false positive. It's a confirmation bias. So you can't possibly do that. There's a different version of it that doesn't involve talent. I'm an English speaker. I'm a primary English speaker. So if someone who speaks Spanish wants to learn English, they shouldn't ask me how to learn English as a second language, because I learned English first. So it became intuitive to me first and always. What does that do? Well, the person who speaks Spanish does not start with intuition. They start with pragmatism and objectivity that translates into their intuition of their first language. So what is a natural person who's more... So in a way, you can say, I am more talented, right? I am more talented at that specific time and moment when someone asks me, how do I learn English? And I'm a native English speaker, and that other person is a native Spanish speaker. I am technically, at that time, more talented than the other person in English, because talent is a component of intuition. So when I explain things in English, I will naturally be more intuitive than analytical when explaining it. To bridge this, ideally you want to meet someone else that already learned English as a second language, and even better if that person is a Spanish speaker who have learned English. And that's a separation of talent too. For me, talent is really, really closely related to intuition. You wouldn't be familiar with... No. So I can help them refine semantics after they develop intuition for the language. So as a native English speaker, one must close the gap in intuition before they bridge that that empathy and resonance. So it's not that you don't look for a native speaker for advice. A person who's learning English as a second language has to develop and close the gap of intuition before they approach someone with that much intuition. Like, for example, how does a talented person relate to another person if they're closer in talent? Because they'll have the same perspectives, they will encounter similar problems, etc., right? Problems, advantages, what does that other talented person remind you of in terms of video games? Your rival. Someone who rivals you. Your competition. In a world of cooperativeness, like learning skills and stuff, it's competency. The word I would use is equal levels of competency, or similar levels, enough to bridge the gap. So yes, it's not permanent. We're talking about that very specific cross-sectional time where at that moment I am a native speaker and another person is illiterate or like just completely non-fluent. At that time, the gap is gigantic, and it deals with the level of intuition. You can develop intuition, and the guy at the top can develop empathy. And to develop empathy is a requirement of analytical skills. It's ironic, I know, but the only way to get yourself out of your reliance on your intuition is to become more analytical about it. And that's the field of education. That's what, in my opinion, in a really long-winded, digressed way, that's the field of education. If you cannot do that, you are not an educator. If you cannot make things easier to understand, not simpler, like there's a big difference. I do not make topics simpler. I try to make topics more understandable, because You're not taking and cutting away all that nitty-gritty hours, 2 hours worth of material. I'm trying to reframe it in a way that is understandable. Not cutting corners, like play more, that's cutting corners. That's not explaining all that stuff in a way that that other person cares about. What I will do is I will explain all these steps in a manner that the other person cares about. I'm trying to match their intuition. So when you're instructing someone, you have to frame it in a way that meets their intuition. If your intuition is this high and theirs is at this high, you know, like lower because they're new, it's your goal as instructor to lower it, and it's their goal to raise it. So they raise it by gaining more experience, and if they're talented, it will be pretty high. But to raise it and to lower it requires analytical skills, because you have to be analytical to remove yourself from your intuition. So as an instructor, as an expert, one of the biggest skill gaps and barrier to being an effective instructor, an educator, or advice or a consultant is to be able to lower your reliance on your intuition. To be pragmatically and objectively concerned with making things easier to understand and not to simplify things. When you simplify things, it's condescending, it's disrespectful, and it also leads to misinformation. I will not tell you that what I'm doing is going to help your aim or your reading comprehension. Slightly less reading comprehension, but it's definitely not going to help your aim. If my aim improves doing this, it's not necessarily because of what I'm doing. So that is objectiveness. That is pragmatism. Like, I do not use my aim. Even if my aim improves, it doesn't mean it helps my aim. It doesn't necessarily mean it helps my aim. I have to prove that it does. So when someone says, play low star maps or play more, it'll help your aim, finger control and stuff, it's like, yeah, technically. But if someone just improves naturally from finger control and aim from anything, like playing FPSs, your advice is not effective, right? Because if you go and play an FPS and you come back and play OS, you might actually see an improvement in your aim. You don't know. Like, you don't know what this person does. So when you evaluate your information, you got to make sure that it's not a placebo or something else. In fact, play more is really elegant. It's super elegant, but most people don't explain it, in my opinion. Most people don't go through the effort of explaining how play more translates to overall consistent improvement in anything. It's kind of like a motivational speaker that says, just do. Like, don't think, just do. The challenge here is to explain why sometimes, or a lot of times, when you stop thinking and you just do it, it inherently consistently improves whatever you're going to do. It's like a 8-hour seminar. You can form a whole class over the philosophy of don't think, just do, right? Unfortunately, for educating and communicating with another person, it's usually think before you do, and it's not the way that you're thinking. I feel like the conventional sense of think before you do is often an approach for fear mongering. So what I mean by that is, most of the time when people think about that phrase, think before you do, is often talking about preventing yourself from making like a butt of yourself, you know, from sounding like a pep or offending someone or something. That's not what I'm using it for. What I'm using it for is think before you do is understand the thing you're responding to. understand what you're going to do before you do it. Think, Mac, think. Freaking Omni man. So the idea is you're thinking about all the nuances of the thing you're about to do. So for example, I can intentionally embarrass myself. It serves a function. If I thought about it, like this person is incredibly embarrassed, they accidentally spilled something on themselves. Well, if you think about it, you could spill something on yourself. Is that just don't think, do? Well, you could think about it and still do it. So that's kind of the idea. It's not just one, it's not a prevention method. It's the weirdest thing that happens all the time, I think, in modern society nowadays. It's like, if you go on YouTube, even on language, oh my gosh, on language, I'm still working. I'm very passionate about this because I've been working on brainstorming the whole day for next year, like all these days, how I'm gonna approach using a educational, like a self-controlled and feedback approach to using a tool and evaluating a tool to learn a new language. Because next year I'm excited because I'm gonna finally do it. I'm gonna commit to learning a language. But I have a very nuanced approach to it. And I can tell you now, one of the deep cuts I had recently is the idea that I'm getting bombarded by people who are on the internet, especially native speakers or people who have already been fluent in learning another language, talking about how don't make these mistakes, like 1, 2, 3 mistakes in learning language. It's like you don't make mistakes in learning language. You get experiences that either are accepted as incorrect or correct, but there's in the learning process, mistakes are part of the learning process. So you don't avoid mistakes. In fact, if you wanted to hear a contradiction, people who actively are doing things encounter higher frequency of making mistakes. Those mistakes ultimately shape their ability to learn quicker. Without and avoiding mistakes, you have no frame of mind to understand how they are mistakes or why they are mistakes or an investigation of them. You're trying to condition a person to be talented from the start. When you are talented from the start, you no longer am encouraged or self-motivated or have a natural process of wanting to do better or wanting to learn more. So inherently, in my opinion, it's counterintuitive, and it's just my rebuttal to this type of content. It's great, it's kind, maybe it's what they want to express, that's fair enough. It just isn't part of the learning process. Removing mistakes, telling people what not to do or what to do, in fact, can be detrimental. Usually the positive ones are okay because people respond to positive feedback all the time. When you use negatives, like making mistakes, you inherently no longer give the person the tools or stimuli, specifically stimuli, to refine themselves. So for example, OS. I struggle with OS, right? If I'm an analytical person, I will naturally continue to play OS because it's interesting that I have a problem to solve. If you're not a problem solver, then you might want to check your intuition at the door. Intuitive people don't like to solve problems. It's not any problems. It rarely is, and it's a small pool of problems that they're willing to solve, which is the stuff they can intuit enough to understand and also feel good about it. So naturally, when you want someone to learn a different language, And this is something I can offer, but it has nothing to do with actually learning English or actually being bilingual. It's knowing the psychology behind learning things. When you go around on the internet thinking, don't make these 10 mistakes on doing things, every success... I'm willing to bet 90% of the successful people of the skill that they're talking about made those mistakes in order to become successful. Like, it's a precursor for their success. Or a prerequisite. They made those mistakes because they did. When you ask those successful people, the first thing they tell you that resonates remarkably, let's just use someone, let's do a shout out to someone that's really influential, like Mr. Beast. I really admire a very specific thing about him. And his thing is do the things. When you made a video and it's kind of like well researched and you did it once and whatnot, that's great. Do 1,000 more, one each day. Keep striving, find something that you want to change, and for the better or for the worse, but as long as you're aiming to be better, see you in 1,000 videos. It will be astronomically better. That's the take-home message. So whenever you watch a video and they're telling you what to do and what not to do, ask yourself if it's part of a learning process. Because in my opinion, teachers arrange a lot already, but in life there are not many human beings, in my opinion, in the vast minority, that want to be not good at any specific thing in order to teach something. And what I mean is, to be a great teacher and an educator, you're practicing things that inherently will make you not as good at the actual thing you're teaching. Why is that? Because it takes that level of thinking in order to actually teach people who don't know anything. So I would say, yeah, I'm a native English speaker. I can probably do a slightly better job only because my English isn't as great as the greatest of greats. Like, I'm not gonna be reciting Shakespearean poetry or doing, like writing epic poems in iambic pentameter or reciting the greatest literatures of Tolstoy or something. I can't do that. But that's not because I don't spend time doing that. I have to keep myself grounded in order to reach people who are much lower than me, to bring them up if they're interested. The higher you get up there, the longer it takes to get back down in intuition to reach an audience that's willing to meet you there. So that's the goal, right? How to be a good judge of character? Well, you need to resonate with them first. So if you're teaching, let's say I meet Coffers and he's about here, and I realize I'm about here. Is this gap enough for Coffers to step up and me to step down to meet? He has things, he's up here, like playing Fortnite, for example. He has things up here, and I'm down here. I have to be willing to ask enough questions and get an idea to reach somewhere where he's willing to drop down to meet me intuitively. Talent in general creates a larger gap. So if you're asking me, how do I feel about being talented per se? Well, if you become more and more analytical, you're probably going to end up thinking less and less like you're talented. Because analytical naturally brings people down, like in an intuitive nature. So many things that were once intuitive might not seem so intuitive anymore. And that's where I am. And that's kind of what teaching is. To be an effective educator, teacher, coach, you kind of struggle with the imposter syndrome a lot. And it's been a long time since I'm lying a little bit. Someone did recently tell me that I was talented because I was drawing something and then I was doing something else, but that feels great. But at the same time, there's no part of me that ever believes I'm talented anymore because I just don't rely on intuition most of the time. So it is actually very, very hard, and it's a common outcome where you experience imposter syndrome when you reject talent or you reject relying on intuition and go on the pragmatic side. And what happens is it removes that weird interaction where when you offer advice and it feels like no one's listening to you. Because generally speaking, if that's the case, then you haven't exercised enough pragmatism and instruction to really communicate that information, right? So if you're ever wondering, like, it's a two-person problem, remember. It's a person willing to come up and come down. But what's the GOAT is if you're incredibly charismatic and you're really analytical and you know how to dissect someone, that person could be the bottom of the barrel in pragmatism and you could just meet them down there. That is, to me, that's the ultimate goal of being a teacher. Wherever the starting point is of the person you're trying to teach, you can meet them there. So what happens is that teacher basically is the dream of the kid, right? The kid goes to school and say, like, you know, this teacher, everything's just easy with this teacher. Like, I just learned calculus because this teacher made it so easy. That's the idea. Because the teacher is bringing the intuition to the level of the kid, not the other way around. Now, as an adult, when you get into more complex things like how to train for oaths and stuff, that's when you kind of need to meet, right? And we're going into this digression, so we're committing to this because I'm ending with this segment. Let's expound upon this a little bit more, right? How does this work? Like, how do you get... So the question is, how do you get out of something? So what I mean is, knowing all this, how do you get out of the specific thing that you only care about one thing, right? Or be really invested in one thing? The idea is, the more you can relate to someone, it has another potentially desirable effect. All right. When I'm sure some of you have heard this phrase before, but let's refresh just in case. When you're an expert and you're meeting someone who wants to become maybe an expert or become knowledgeable about things, and you have to come down to their level, right? You have to come down to their level and they meet with your level. What happens is this person has grown while you have learned to understand this person's perspective. What happens in this situation? Well, this is where when you meet, the teacher learns something from the person they're teaching. And the person they're teaching is starting to get the ability to teach the former teacher. What happens there is there will be an exchange of ideas. And that exchange of ideas will both enhance the quality of life of the teacher and the person learning. If you don't meet that, if you, like one of the end processes, if you did not gain something from the person you taught, and that person didn't give you something for teaching them, then you haven't reached that connection. So to me, the most gratifying indicator that you have managed to do something as an instructor and as a teacher or an expert is that that person was able to give back something and acknowledge that you have given them something. And in response, you have also received that something and given them something. So for example, I play OS because I was exposed and interested in, you know, talking about and telling other people about this game. The community has taught me something about the community themselves and all the people that I've met. I've learned what it is like to be in the mindset, at least part way. I don't completely resonate with the OS community, but it's not from not trying, right? So I've learned and adapted and taken a lot of inspiration from the OS community, and I use it for other things. So it's taken it from me. And what have I given back? Well, I've met people that potentially have done other things now because they were exposed to me outside of OS, right? That's the idea. So it's not just one-way exchange. It's a dual-way exchange. So when you meet people, I know this sounds counterintuitive. When you form intuition on the internet, this is someone who's lost, who feels isolated, so they go to the internet and they're looking for people like them, right? So they end up finding people like them. Now, when you find people like you, the gap, the intuition gap, is really close. However, there's still a gap because humans are not telepathic. You cannot meet one-to-one with any other human being but yourself. I mean, sometimes people actually don't meet one-to-one with themselves. More on that in a little bit. But the gap is like this. So if you were successful at bridging that gap, both that group, that community still has the capacity to learn and expand. I can tell you the gap is a lot bigger than most people think. Like, hey, I go to the OS community, and then you realize like, I never feel like I resonate with the rest of the OS community. And that's not more of a reflection of, that's more of a reflection of self and your expectation of how much pre-selection can happen with a game. It's pretty strict, actually. It's on the high side. OS community's barrier is kind of big. It's still, I think it's still higher than the pre-selection from FromSoft games, right? So when you pre-select, you're in that expectation like, oh yeah, I'm gonna meet other people like me, right? Like, so, to some extent. However, there's still a gap, whichever direction, if you feel you're lower or higher. But what happens is you have to meet. And when you meet, you resonate. It involves both parties exercising some pragmatism or some objectivity to bridge understanding that they otherwise don't have. And then in that process, you will learn that the other person or each other have properties that you will acquire over time. And that's how you expand out of it. So what is the incentive to actually understanding someone? It's always like, why does it all, to me, it almost always feels like an incentive? Because there's always an opportunity when you resonate with someone to take something from him that you develop a care for that wasn't your own. So this is a deep cut and digression into how to get out of depression, boredom, complacency, a lot of things, and why the usual first method is to have a support system, right? The golden goose is to always have a support system, and that support system will try to bridge the gap when you're really depressed and you're surrounded by people who are not depressed, right? support system. What happens is those people, if they really intuitively resonate a lot, they'll probably be close in gap, but they care about you so much that even when you're at the bottom, having people around you that will go to the depths to meet you there will offer you the connection and an avenue to the way out of your pit, like your level of thinking. So that, in my opinion, is something I'm working on. It's a way I'm trying to like it's not new, it's just presented differently. I'm trying to present it differently so that it can visually be appreciated, like understandable enough to even someone who's like really upset or having problems getting out, or like trying to talk to other people because they're miserable. The idea is to visualize that if you don't want to do anything at all, you just have no motivation to do anything at all, visualize yourself and think the first step is to talk to anyone. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to find someone who's willing to just hammer down and get on your level, whichever it is. It's either down or up, which relative. It's all relative, right? And up is not positive, down is not negative. It's just you have to be on the same level. So that's kind of like the idea of encouraging people to, if it's not a person, it's a thing. If it's not a thing, it's a subject. The things I emphasize whenever doing training or anything recording is I'm actively having conversations with myself that allows me to rehearse and practice for when I need to resonate with another person or need to communicate with another person. Because your strongest instrument and the most reliable thing whenever you're stuck hyper-focusing on your own things is a stimuli from outside. And you can't just, you need the capacity also, or the practice, to extract that information. Like, for example, here's a good one. If you're struggling, right? If you're struggling just being happy and someone compliments you, it's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Like, you're doing super well. And if you're not practiced enough to read or understand what the intent of that person is, then you've also lost an opportunity on how that can make you feel better, right? So on the one hand, that person is feeling good, so they're going to express a sentiment that is positive. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to get as closely possible to you, knowing that you're not doing so hot. And I would say that kind of approach is like halfway, maybe like 30%. So how do you reach that? You need the tools and the practice skills to reach it. One of the skills is how to recognize what the intent behind a compliment is. There are different types of compliments. The goal is to practice the skill of understanding the other person, right? And that skill requires a lot of practice. So it's not just taking any compliments. It's understanding the person behind the compliment. What can that compliment be? It could be a video game. It could be a video. It could be a card. Music. Art. Most of the things that are constructed and created by humans is an extension of themselves. So if you really want to tax and enjoy your analytical skills and test their analytical skills, being interested in the human behind the product is kind of a big deal. So what does that translate? We're going to take it full circle. That's why giving advice can tell me a lot about the person giving the advice. When I ask a question, I'm not just simply looking for an answer by listening. I'm trying to understand how they respond. So understanding the person is listening to understand something is very different from listening to respond to something. So for example, that's why I'm not the biggest fan on pleasantries. Pleasantries tend to be socially acceptable as listening to respond. So for example, hey, how are you? This person is waiting for your response. They're not waiting to try to learn something from you. Typically, the vast majority of people are using it as a way to respond. Like, hey, I'm doing well, how are you? You're waiting for a response. You're not planning your next move. You're not thinking about your next move. I am. I'm always planning my next move. Like, I don't just say, you can't tell the difference until you pull the trigger. So until I get the go, I won't extend on it. But I don't just say, I'm doing well, how are you? And then wait for a response before coming up with an idea. I will have an idea in case I want to share if the person doesn't want to respond. That's the difference between looking to understand, listening and communicating to understand someone, than playing the reply game. Regardless of where the conversation goes, if there's a period of silence, I would say full confidently, I let it get silent. That's if suddenly everything is quiet, if you're talking to me, is because I recognize that perhaps it's very comforting for that other person to be in a state of quietness. There's time for pausing, and then there's time for conversation. The silver lining in this, some people might, a lot of people, I would say, lots of youngins out there would say something like, oh yeah, but it's so tiresome or exhausting or nerve-wracking or anxious, right? Lots of anxiety to always have to plan and lead a conversation. Well, I'm gonna tell you one thing. If you have the ability to always know that you can lead the conversation, it's a chicken or the egg thing. To remove that insecurity, to beat the insecurity and the worrisome and concern about talking to someone genuinely requires you to practice that very skill. When you have that skill on lockdown, there's no amount of nervousness or anxious that can deflate your concern, because you can always take control, or you feel you can always take control of the conversation in a way that benefits both parties. And that comes with practice. It's kind of tough, but it's one of those things where the solution is the thing you don't want to do. Honestly, that's a hot take about most life skills. Life skills only become better when you actually practice those skills. So to start is that whole saying, starting is probably one of the hardest things. And we're not talking about video games. We're talking about life skills. Video games, there's a pre-selection, right? You can see what a game is going to be like now before you even play it. Life, you can't see what it's going to be like before you do it. You can only see what it's going to be like after you do it a lot. And that is the solution to this stuff. How do you develop empathy? How do you become a good teacher in education? How do you improve your interpersonal skills? The whole don't think, just do is, in my opinion, apt for this. and thinking meaning thinking without prior experience. So that's the biggest asterisk. If you have a lot of experience, then you're not thinking about it, you're just doing. If to get to that state, you have to stop thinking about things you can't possibly know about to gain experience, right? That's kind of the idea. It's like a duality. You can think about things when you have the experience. Otherwise, what are you going to base it on? And one of the biggest things, I think there was like a slight digression here, was, oh yeah, I had a conversation about parenting. Just a little bit, just a little touch. This is just a teaser. I haven't worked out the ideas yet. This is a kind of a dark topic. When you are a victim of abuse, if you choose to ignore it and reject it, you're not learning anything from it. So naturally you gain nothing from it. And then when you act on that ignorance, it doesn't necessarily lead or guarantee you to be not the thing you despise or reject, because you have no knowledge of it. So for example, this cycles back to the whole learning language and the learning process of making mistakes. You can't possibly know if you're making mistakes if you never make them in the first place. You can try your best to mitigate the mistakes by having someone tell you what those mistakes are, but you have no idea what happens when you make those mistakes. What do you learn from those mistakes? Well, you will never know. You never make those mistakes. It's a trade-off. Perhaps that person saved you a life of heartache. Absolutely. And perhaps not. There's only one it either happened or it didn't in life. One thing's for sure, a mistake is an event in your life when it comes to a learning process. There are things you can avoid that I would agree with, like things that kill you. That's something different. Do you want to learn death? Like literally, I can make an exception for that, but that's a minor topic. When I mean like minor topic is, that's an extreme scenario. The learning process, that involves mistakes or things that you thought were mistakes, right? So the next time you watch a video and someone says 10 things I would avoid doing if I had to do it all over again, think about it to yourself and ask yourself what kind of person it takes for a person to make a video like that, and what kind of person this person is, thinking that the people who are viewing their videos would want to know that. It's not bad or good. It's just to give you the framework of always listening to understand, not listening to respond. As in, when you're listening to learn something, you are also trying to take everything from it, not just the literal advice. The literal advice is a response tactic. If I told you, you should do what I'm doing right now to gain stamina like I do, your first question would be, what kind of person are you? Like, what is this person's background? Did they clearly explain certain things? Do they demonstrate to me in this video that they have the competence level to reveal this? How much effort do I need to do and background research do I need to do before I start to trust this person? Right? Your input and their input have to match, or like match enough for you to accept the level of trust. Nowadays, it's more like trust me, bro. I'm going to exploit your psychology to get you to trust me. Like any newcomer comes in, it's like, hey, I'm going to use fear, and I'm also going to use credentials to create blind faith. So naturally, what's the criteria for language? Language is the one that is the absolute most deceptive. Because if you're listening to me right now as I explain certain things, the first thing I could say is, I've used English my whole life. Therefore, you should listen to me when I talk about learning English. That's inherently a logical fallacy. Like what indicator would suggest that I'm good at teaching English? Did I communicate that? You're looking for those things. It's not just what they recite. Like, for example, someone starts a tech channel and all they did was read off the specs of Samsung's phones. Oh, that guy does know a lot about the details of the phones. And that's it. That's where the level of thinking ends. Like, no, why would he think I need to know these specs? Does he think that I'm a person that cares about these specs? Do I care about these specs? Are these specs important to the understand? All these questions, you gotta keep going. Dig. Look at the person's background. And then that person is also, the background that that person offers is part of their effort to communicating that. How often does that happen? And how often do people engage in that type of investigation? I'm gonna tell you now, in the internet hustle culture, I'm willing to bet less than 50% of people even go any lengths to even asking, well, this person kind of feels like they know what they're doing. Like, well, yes and no. Often the ones that are most successful, either luckily or intuitively, with talent, intuited how to exploit psychology or see patterns enough to exploit psychology. Not maliciously, just they're trying to survive, you know, become popular, make a career. All these are benevolent and endearing qualities. Objectively, it does not change the idea that the examples or inspiration or points of things that they did is exploiting psychology. When your video is titled, "These are the things you must avoid when learning a new language," you are exploiting psychology. You are exploiting fear. In fact, those fears may become the very real glass ceilings to so many people's journey to learning a new language. That fear puts caps on OS players. That fear places caps on competitive process. That fear places a cap on the creative process. That's not subjectivity. It inherently eliminates. Objectively, it just closes doors. That's the only thing it does. With a certainty, it closes certain doors. It can open other doors, but those doors that you're saying are literally closed. There's no that's the intent of your thing. So those doors get closed. No argument. No, that's not an opinion. You're literally telling people not to do certain things. Now ask yourself, what kind of person needs to say those things? If you can understand why that person say those things, you can at least appreciate why those things are significant to them, and then you can better evaluate if they're significant to you. Was AFK for a bit, but I had a question. Not sure if you touched on it. How would you go about a situation where you're succeeding at one part of a skill set, but when you change your focus to other parts, you find yourself stuck at one level over extended periods of time? How different approach could even be inside one skill set for this to be like that? I did touch upon that in a little bit, just like a tangential, indirect way. One of the things is to find inspiration, right? So when you are in a situation where you're succeeding on a subset of a skill, right? Say your envision is a complex skill that has a subset of different skills, and you have 1 or 2 skills, and you're changing your focus because those skills are refined to a point where you're gonna have diminished return, right? Say OS is like aim, tapping, and stamina. If those are the skills you're paying attention to, and you focus on 2 of those skill sets, and you need to get to a 3rd, and you're working on that, but it's just stuck. Generally speaking, it is going to be diminished return where you keep breaking it apart until you can't break it apart anymore. And the idea, hopefully, is that your investigation of that new skill gives you inspiration from other sources that allows you to either deviate away from that skill that's like tangentially related, or you continue breaking it down. And I do understand the whole feeling like maybe I've already gotten to the bottom of it and I've tried everything, right? The whole idea of you reach to a point where like you've tried everything. In the realm of human creativity, the only way you have reached a point of trying everything is when you exhaust your own ideas. So the only other source is everyone else's. So you reach out, right? You try ideas from other people. Maybe people you trust, maybe people you don't. And then beyond that, if say no one knows, right? This is where you become a scientist or a person who has a PhD. You're in a field where no one else has any ideas. Then the goal is to try to create your own, which is not great. Like, it is such a daunting task. In the end, your satisfaction with where you are can be countered by your need to continue improving. So the quick band-aid rip is that you become acceptant of where you are, right? And that's kind of a cop-out. It's kind of like, but I want to stay motivated. I want to keep doing that stuff. Then you find other avenues creatively. You create new ways to measure that specific skill or measure satisfaction of that skill. So you're not directly placing the strain on that skill anymore, like your attachment to that skill indirectly. And those are like some avenues. The short answer is inspire yourself to be creative, whether it's within or outside. Generally it's outside. And otherwise you have to find acceptance, which acceptance can be kind of hard. The silver lining for acceptance is that you will find substitutes for it. So when you're truly acceptant of the thing you no longer like, you're stuck at, like say you accept that you're stuck at something, naturally speaking, you will find, as a healthy individual, you'll find something that substitutes for it, something that will replace it on top, and you begin your journey again. So the goal is, 2 of the most reliable things is accept that you're stuck here, be fond of it, and then now you go on to develop a different skill. Like that's, and what happens is that skill may or may not come back to improve everything you had already. You won't know that, but the idea is you'll become just as motivated on the new thing. If you truly have become acceptant of where you are, you can also move on. You can always come back too. There's always a chance to come back. It's really difficult to ever know the next thing you do will suddenly feed back on itself. For example, people who rediscover their joy for art later in life. Like someone who writes a book in their 50s And they always dreamt of being an author, but they became a scientist for the longest time. You can never underestimate how well things connect, because you need creativity. You need a creative source somewhere. If you're out of ideas, then you need a muse. You're looking for a muse. And the nice thing about humanity is it's foreseeably endless in someone's lifetime. I don't think, generally speaking, there are very few humans who truly have thought of everything before their mortal lifespans end. I don't think there's, like, what does that human look like? Think about, what does that human look like? Well, when they die with complete apathy and peace of mind that they have nothing else to look forward to and nothing else to create. I don't think I described even 1% of human beings. So naturally, I believe in the idea that any of the above. Find acceptance, develop a different skill. There's always a chance it'll come back. Find someone else, exchange ideas, continue your journey. Right? Those are the most element. And the one that I touch upon earlier is the idea that, say, you're a teacher who accepted their level of skill, which is kind of where I am right now. Like, I'm not gonna push for like some new horizon or something, but I like the idea of using and consolidating all my experience to offer as a teaching material, or maybe a discussion material, right? In that process, I'm going to interact with other people who are learning as well. We're talking about stuff. And because of that process, I'm going to be inspired to do something different with what I learned. Because it's an exchange of ideas. The moment the teacher teaches something to someone else, and that someone else also reaches to the teacher, you exchange ideas. And that led into the conversation of listening to understand, not listening to respond. So when someone offers me advice, I'm trying to understand their advice, not respond with my own advice. As in, whose advice is better? It's, can I understand this person's advice, explain the advice to that person, and then reciprocate with my own advice and explain it as a suggestion. If I can do both, I'm actively synthesizing what they want me to do, and it offers me another avenue to doing that. So when someone shows me a video, I don't just explain to them how I feel about something. I explain to them what I think they might be thinking, or what their motivation is. So when I speak and analyze it, I'm taking into consideration, why did this person share it with me? I gotta ask about that. But maybe I'll take a jab at it first. So whenever I respond, it sounds like a freaking, a heckin' 6,000 word essay, is because I'm trying to guess and understand the context of the video and the context in which the video was given to me. So much like when you're asking this question, I'm trying to encompass as much of the detail as possible from the perspective of why you asked me in that form, right? So I address as many parts of the question as possible in order to make it relevant in some way. And then near the end, I obviously did the whole concise hot take, which is find inspiration. For me, I do the 80-20 rule, and you've heard me say this a couple of times. If I feel like I'm approximately 80 percentile, I'm willing to accept where my skill set is. Once I reach about 80 percentile, that's when I switch over to teaching mode, or discussion mode, or consolidating the experience. So I start writing about it. I start thinking about how to explain this to other people. And that's the mode where I stopped improving the literal skill and using my skill that I spend most of my life doing, which is teaching. Mainly, specifically, communication. So everything I learn is an extension of teaching and discussion. So OS, while it may be the lifeblood of someone else and everything branches from OS, for me, everything branches from how do I make it so that I can use it as a teaching tool or a life lesson? How do I get people to, if they want to do something, how do I get them to do it? Or, you know, like, in a way, I'm kind of like the same intent as the people who openly give advice. Only I try to give advice beyond that. It's not better or worse, because what happens is the advice that I give might not be intuitive, right? It's actually often, and now I feel like now it comes full circle, right? Why do my advice typically feel like it's unintuitive, but easy to understand? The reason is, in order for me to understand and teach and be an effective teacher, you have to remove intuition out of the equation. However, you have to make it easy enough to understand so that the other person can process and take in that information without relying on their intuition. So most things are counterintuitive, as I said a lot of times. So when you're explaining things that is removed from intuition, inherently, even if it's not counterintuitive, it's just non-intuitive in general. So what is non-intuitive about improving a skill set you're stuck at, for example? Stop thinking about it and do something else. That's a very, very logical and pragmatic way of approaching it. It's an option. It's a thing that can overall increase your satisfaction of the skill set and the value of the skill set. So for example, you can take whatever level of your skill set you have now and apply it to the next thing. It doesn't have to be in this system. So what's another thing? Play a different rhythm game, for example, and then come back. You never know. That new rhythm game might inspire you to come back, and that feeds on itself. So it's counterintuitive, right? To think, hey, to get good at this game, I have to always practice this game. Well, no, not really. It's actually even more, to me, while I say it's non-intuitive to most people, it's actually intuitive for me to encourage someone to take a break from OS and play something related to OS, and then come back. I can explain it so that it's easy to understand why that can work. However, what I just said will inherently always be counterintuitive. Skill building is the summation of a human's experience, not necessarily the specific craft. At the highest level, it can possibly be argued that it requires an unfathomable amount of dedication and time. Even so, then, those people have to know how to keep their nutrition in line. They have to know how to rest. There are so many skills, even at the incredible top level, let's do a shout out to the marathon runners, like Kiptum and Kipchoge, like arguably two of the best marathoners in the world. I would reckon if you ask them, they will still talk to you about how they stay healthy. And that involves a lot of skills that they build. They run like a marathon every day or something, and it's within 3 hours. But to get to that point, what else are they doing for the rest of the hours? So that's kind of the idea. When you start focusing on analyzing a skill, it becomes more and more focused. And the natural counterintuitive thing to do is to step back and be less focused for a brief time, to take in inspiration, to play something else, come back, take a break. It's more likely to work than not work, is what I'm saying. I'm not guaranteeing you anything, obviously, because that it depends thing can come up. You could end up choosing and falling in love with something that's entirely unrelated. And how do you wrap your head around that? Well, you acquired a skill that's entirely unrelated. What it doesn't do is probably help you with the skill that you were stuck on. That's fair enough. Probably unlikely. But what it did help you with is to build a skill that doesn't interfere with what you already have. So if it doesn't help you improve the skill, the new skill doesn't help improve the skill that you have now, it also doesn't hurt it either. And generally speaking, you have to balance your perspective. When you learn new things, it also interferes with old things, in both good and bad. Whenever you're constantly focused on what you want, you always generally gravitate towards avoiding the negative, ignoring what else can happen, and then only focusing on what you desire, not what can happen. So what you desire can end up being worse. However, because you desire it, you only focus on what it can offer. That's one way, that's one way to look at it. It's not multiple ways to look at it. So when you develop another skill and take a break, you don't know that taking a break perhaps refreshes your mind and memory for the skill that you left behind for a bit. Call it a second win, I suppose. Like when you're down and out, suddenly a second win happens later, and you come back even stronger. That can happen. If you don't come back even stronger, in my case, in my example, likely is the thing you found is probably stronger than the thing you came back to. And what does that do? Well, overall, you as a person, now you have two strong things. Not one strong thing, two strong things. In less time, even. I would argue probably even less time. So there are lots of possibilities. If you only want to focus on the positive, a positive way to think about it is if you step away, you're not going to lose a lot. You have far more to gain stepping away for a moment than not stepping away. If you've reached that point. So if you reach the point where you've exhausted everything, you feel like you've come up with all the ideas, stepping back, doing something else, will inherently, statistically, on average, be more efficient with your time than continuing to do it, right? You don't have the answers, you don't know where to start. It's kind of like know where to start too. If you're thinking about it, if you spend a lot of time thinking about it and you've exhausted everything, that is diminishing return. You're not going to get anything out of it. That's kind of, it's not bad. I'm not going to make it sound like it's a bad thing, because you can also frame it in a positive thing. You've closed this door for now. You didn't lock it behind you. You closed the door so you can check out all the other doors and what's behind those doors. It's not shut a door, lock it, bar it up and never open it again. It's you close the door and you'll come back to it. Maybe. Some days when you open a door, I should draw a diagram of this. Like you shut a door, say the door is here, you shut it, and then you go to this door. It opens up. But what if that path leads back to the door that you shut? You don't know. You have no idea. And if you don't do that at all, you'll never know. What you do know, though, is if you think you've exhausted all your ideas, it's exhausted. What you do know for sure is that it won't improve. If you convince yourself it won't improve, right? So why bother spending time with thinking about how to improve something that you've convinced yourself this isn't gaslighting. It's not self-gaslighting. I'm appealing like I believe you. You're stuck. So logic would dictate, if you're stuck, do something that you're not stuck at for the time being. Because if you're stuck, how are you going to use your time if you're truly stuck? So I absolutely completely take your weight. That's how I take your weight in your words. I trust that you understand when you're stuck. So this is the acceptance part. I'm accepting that you know you're stuck. And if I believe in that, then stop spending time being stuck. Do something you're not stuck in. And one day, you have no idea, but it might just unstuck itself. That's how I usually learn things though. Iteratively open and close different doors. It's just a little strange when some of the rooms stay the same over time. Yeah. And that might be something, that might be something you can come up with a different approach for. For me, if I were to give you an idea as an inspiration, it's more of a trophy thing. So I have doors that I close and collect it on the side. What I can do to give them value is not that they don't stay the same. It's that they largely stay the same. And the thing about them staying the same is how they literally stay the same. But what I do is I create stories around them. And it breathes new value to them. So they don't ever stay the same. Because I'm telling stories about them. So like, for example, my childhood will always stay the same. If you're trying to be pragmatic about it, you can't change anything about your childhood. It's already happened. But it never stays the same. Not to me. Not to anyone that I'm talking to. Not to even my friends who hear my story 3 times in a row, 4 times in a row. Memory is fluid for human beings. So it's kind of ironic because it's also a deep cut to nothing stays the same, even if you think it stayed the same. And a lot of times that's revolving around how you feel. However, objectively speaking, like, we have metrics, right? We have our height being measured or our weight being measured. Those things have literal objectivity. That's true. Even those to me don't stay the same. 100, if I'm the same weight as I am when I was 20, it's not the same anymore. It's not the same weight. They're not the same. Human beings, at most things are tenuous. They're tentative and dynamic. So if I don't ever play OS again, I'll tell you about stories about OS. It keeps OS alive. That door is closed, but it's also open. You can see through it. It's a glass door. I can take the information out of that door and share it with people. It will forever have more and more value. I don't discard my things. If I can't use it literally, I'll use it figuratively. This is probably the most flexiest I'll get. It's a weird flex, I know. But the idea is, I can make things sound valuable when they don't ever change. What is so valuable about my childhood? Well, I can tell you a few things. There's a lot of stories about overcoming adversity. And they mean different things. The same story can mean very different things when I intend it to. So on the one hand, overcoming adversity could be a triumph and a Cinderella story about the American dream, perhaps. Or it can be a morbid discussion about bullying and how it affected my insecurities that I had to overcome later in life. It can be all those things. And that has very little to what it literally is, right? It'll be ever changing. Also, to phrase it better and make it more clear, it doesn't stay the same. It's just that I want to make the ceiling higher, but I only managed to make the room wider. Well, I'll play the pun. I'll play the pun for you. So what I've discussed so far is that it's about the volume of the room, not any specific dimension. So what you reveal to me is that you focus on a specific aspect of the room, not the entire room. A human is the volume of the room, not any particular dimension. A single-story house can look incredibly beautiful and filled with volumes of untold stories, much like a skyscraper. So, you know, if you want to literally go into architecture, right? There are beautiful one-story, like a good example would be Apple's headquarters. It's definitely more wide than it is tall, but it is kind of fun to think about if you want it to be a skyscraper. Like, so there is, just to empathize with you, I can see that it is more your aspirations to be a skyscraper than it is to, you know, to touch the heavens, right? To reach for the sky than to be grounded. So let's make them both positive, right? A house, a room that is incredibly wide is far more grounded than a skyscraper trying to reach the sky. Now let's think about all the positive things. While you're certainly way taller and high, but which one's more stable? When you're one story, you're more stable. What does stability mean? You have bigger foundations. Skyscrapers can be very tenuously happy, right? Because there's one point, one path. But when you have a wide room, you have consistency and foundation. It doesn't topple over. It doesn't succumb to the weather. The metaphor goes on, but it's a fun metaphor. Like, I would love to like go into a long digression on how to metaphorically turn architecture into an expression of human emotions and personality, because we have to remember, architecture is an extension of humans. Architecture is an extension of human creativity. So naturally, if you look at a structure and a building, like a room, like here's a great exercise. When you go to your room, characterize your room, explain your room, explain the items that are in your room, what they mean to you, and then ask yourself, can you change any of them? Do you want to change any of them? Because the room is an extension of yourself. So for me, you can, as a human being, you can find beauty in any aspect of your room. How that room develops is part of your life. It's a summation of your life. So yeah, you can want to be a skyscraper sometimes if you're looking at skyscrapers all the time. So right now, you're going around looking at skyscrapers. Naturally, you would probably evaluate most of your perspective as skyscrapers. You're thinking about how tall your room is. And what I can see most of the time when I'm talking is, what about how wide your room is? I'm kind of curious. If your room isn't wide, I can tell you there are a lot of interesting things to make it wider. And when your room is wider, it can also support a taller structure. Just saying, that's how pyramids work. Just think about how pyramids work. If you want a taller pyramid, you gotta get a wider room. I haven't gone down this line of thinking. This is just improvisational, but you know, all the elements are there. So here's a thought. Here's a silver lining, okay? You're just making the room wider so that one day your room can get taller. How's that? That's a little bit of gaslighting, so I would take it with a grain of salt, because widening one's room doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll get taller. What it does guarantee, regardless, so the thing that I said was safer. Regardless of how tall your room is and how wide your room is, when you do something, the volume always increases. When you become wider or taller, your volume always increases. So if there's anything worth entertaining, like my suggestion is perhaps a perspective about how big the room is a way to encourage yourself to do anything, like more things, so that you can fill the room up, right? Or increase the room itself. Because that's what, in my opinion, what a human is, right? That's legacy. Your room is your legacy, regardless of how tall or wide it is. Legacy increases when you're not stuck. There's one thing that will be absolute. When your room doesn't get taller or wider, you're stuck. And when you're stuck, nothing changes, or nothing feels like it changes. So if you're one connection with the feeling, if you feel like things don't change too often, it might be time to take a step back and see what else you can add to your room. Maybe a poster. I always wanted to do this thought experiment. If I end up getting a larger audience in the future, I want someone to draw me their figurative room. I've done this before, no joke. This is not a coincidence. It might sound like Worm that I was ready for this. It was a coincidence that you are using rooms, because I use the door metaphor a lot. I thought about this narrative and this thought experiment, and it bleeds into the idea that sometimes when someone can't speak to me or explain what their problem is or things that they don't want to share, I just simply visit them and look at their room or look at what they have extensions of themselves. Because if a person is not, it's still a barrier. However, it's less of a barrier than trying to rely on the person's ability to express themselves in an emotionally compromised state. So if the person is unable to express themselves, like verbally, there are other ways. There are other windows to this person. Looking at their schedule, what they do, literally looking at their schedule and looking what they do. Not like if they're unable to communicate with you, or look at the room. Like look at what they, what they own, what they look at. There are so many things that can help with a potential. I guess the word is potentially, the phrase is potentially help. There's no guarantee that there's a solution, like a step 1, 2, 3 easy solution to it. The idea is, though, the more observant you become about human extension, which goes all the way back to the beginning of this digression as a wrap up. Seeing, listening, and reading with an intent to understand is incredibly hard, exhausting, and requires that you be in a mindset of excess energy. So if you're bored maybe with excess energy, and you're tired of focusing on yourself and you don't really have anything you're interested in, that extra energy can be used to try to understand, listen, see, read, and think with the intent of understanding, as opposed to the intent of responding or like reacting to it. That extra energy can go a long way to practicing a skill that, in my opinion, has no upper limit. It doesn't have physical boundaries. It doesn't have a glass ceiling. And its return on investment is infinite, in my opinion. It's like you can spend your entire life getting returns on this skill, and you can spend your entire life working on this skill, and it becomes easier, quote unquote easier, and more efficient if you practice it. It is incredibly hard, because the first thing you have to do is you have to stop thinking about yourself, and you have to make sure you don't have to think about yourself before you practice this skill. You can still try though. A lot of people balance it, like they still have things that they don't like about themselves and all that stuff, and then they're using it to try to look for things in others and try to understand them, but it creates a lot of interference. So it can be worked on side by side. It's just a lot harder. So one day when you're bored and you want to learn something and you're just saying, oh man, I have 3 hours and I just don't know what to do, pick up anything. First thing you do is you watch it, read it, whatever, and try to understand the person who did it. Ask yourself, why did the person do this? What is it trying to tell me through the person's shoes? So it's a great exercise in leaving your own body. And with that, you can come up with new ideas. You can come up with new ideas all the time. So if I saw a dog right now, I can come up with a new idea. You just set the analogy, the metaphor of the room. I take that idea and I'm molding it. I'm using your perspective to communicate what I'm saying without saying any more. Like I didn't add any of my own vocabulary. I just took a room and just molded into something that perhaps you can use in the future, and hopefully maybe you'll share the same advice later. You know, like one day you'll be like, yo dude, check this out. One day I thought it was really fun to be taller than the Sears Tower. I'm sorry, I only know of a US example right now, or a Toronto CN Tower. But you know what? It's even cooler to be a 1-level bunker. You know? Nothing can touch me. Like, it will survive a nuclear holocaust. Something like that. I'm starting to like run into a little dead end on the complexity. But that's a good stopping like sentiment for this digression. And an end to this. I know I've been hearing this melody in the back for quite some time, but I still have something else to do today. Today is reset day, so we gotta move to a different thing. So that's a wrap for the digression. I have a good idea of how to label this one. I think we're gonna do more of these type of digressions at the beginning or end of these. Anyways, there you have it. If it sounded overwhelming, my only advice here, as a cathartic advice, like an empathy thing, is just take one thing at a time. If it took you 3 hours to listen to someone and only understand one thing, 1 is still greater than 0. And trying, if it's 0, trying is still greater than not at all. The sky's the limit. The heavens is the limit. Or maybe 1,000, 1,000 kilometers that way is the limit. It just keeps going further. Like, you don't have to just think of vertical distance, you can think of horizontal distance, right? Or even Z. You can't really think, time it's kind of hard. Alright. That's a wrap. Today's, by the way, today's practice was pretty good. It's still a work in progress. Alrightos. Thanks for Thanks for the inspiration. All from Os, right? It all started with Os.
See you next time.
See you next time.